In July 2002, a man in Ohio took his own life. Routine. Tragic. The case was closed within a week, except for one detail the coroner's office almost didn't check. His fingerprints belonged to someone who had been dead for 57 years. Not a coincidence, not a clerical error. For more than 30 years, the man living in that house, paying that mortgage, going to that job, and saying good morning to those neighbors, had been living under the identity of a 16-year-old boy who died in a car crash in 1945. Pause. The FBI confirmed it within weeks, but then they did something even stranger. They kept the case open, because solving the identity theft didn't solve the mystery. It only raised a far more disturbing question. If that wasn't the man buried in 1945, then who was? That question has never been answered, not by the FBI, not by advances in forensic science, not by 2 decades of investigation, even today. No one knows who that man really was. He lived an entire adult life in a quiet American town. He worked. He paid taxes. He had neighbors. He had a home. But the name everyone knew was stolen, and the man behind it has never been identified. To everyone in Eastlake, Ohio, he was Robert Ivan Nichols, a quiet engineer, a private man. He lived alone. His lawn was always perfectly maintained. His neighbors described him as polite, reserved, and impossible to truly know. In July 2002, he took his own life. Investigators believed the case would be over within days. Instead, it became one of the strangest identity mysteries in FBI history. To understand how this happened, you first have to understand the real Joseph Newton Chandler III. He was born in 1929, Sherman, Texas, an ordinary American boy. In 1945, at just 16 years old, he was killed in a car accident. His story should have ended there. A teenager, a funeral, a small cemetery, another family trying to move on. For nearly 30 years, no one had any reason to think about Joseph Chandler again, until someone did. Sometime in the mid-1970s, a man requested a copy of Chandler's birth certificate. At the time, that was surprisingly easy. Birth records and death records were rarely compared. No computer flagged the contradiction. No government office raised a question. On paper, a dead teenager could become a living adult. Someone realized that and took advantage of it. What followed was astonishing. A social security number, a driver's license, a mortgage, tax records, employment history. For decades, every official document in America told the same story. Joseph Newton Chandler III was alive. The only problem was that the real Joseph Chandler had been dead since 1945. For nearly 3 decades, nothing about the man known as Robert Ivan Nichols raised any suspicion. Officially, he was still Joseph Newton Chandler III. But in everyday life, everyone knew him as Robert Nichols. He worked as an engineer for years. His colleagues described him as intelligent, quiet, competent, a man who did his job and kept to himself. He never married. He never had children. At least, none investigators have ever found. He never traveled outside the United States, not once. According to every record available, he spent nearly his entire adult life in Ohio. There was something else investigators would later find remarkable. Almost no photographs of him existed. He avoided company events. He never appeared in newsletters. He was rarely seen with other people. In an era before smartphones, before social media, before everyone carried a camera, a man managed to live for almost 30 years, leaving behind almost no visual record of his own face. Then, everything changed. In July 2002, His neighbors noticed something unusual. His lawn hadn't been mowed. For Robert Nichols, that wasn't normal. Police entered the house. They found he had died, days earlier, by his own hand. At first, there was nothing to suggest this was anything more than a quiet tragedy. A private man, living alone, a routine investigation. The body was processed just like any other unattended death. Fingerprints were taken, a standard procedure, nothing unusual, nothing remarkable, except that single bureaucratic step changed everything. Because those fingerprints didn't belong to Robert Nichols. They didn't even belong, to Joseph Newton Chandler III. They belonged, to a boy who had died more than half a century earlier. The fingerprints were entered into the standard FBI databases. No one expected what came back. The prints matched a man who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Joseph Newton Chandler III, born 1929, died 1945, Sherman, Texas. A 16-year-old boy who had died 57 years earlier was somehow the legal identity of a man who had just died in Ohio, a man who appeared to be decades older. At first, the local coroner's office assumed it was a mistake, a clerical error, a problem with the database. They ran the fingerprints again. The result didn't change. Same fingerprints, same name. Investigators contacted the Texas Vital Records Office. The original death certificate was still there, exactly where it had been since 1945, untouched, undisputed. There were now 2 deaths, one in Texas, one in Ohio, 57 years apart, both under the same name. That was the moment. This stopped being a local investigation and became an FBI mystery. Within weeks, the FBI's Cleveland field office took over the investigation. Investigators began reconstructing the previous 30 years of one man's life. They were looking for a single moment, the point, where a false identity had been stitched onto a real one. Instead, they found almost nothing. Not by accident, by design. There were no military records beyond those belonging to the real Joseph Chandler. No international travel. No history of living abroad. There were no close family members that investigators could identify. No emergency contacts that led anywhere. No old friends who knew anything before the mid-1970s. When they searched his home, they found no letters, no family photographs, no childhood memories, no personal documents connecting him to any life before he became Joseph Chandler. Investigators noticed something important. This wasn't the kind of absence you would expect, from someone who was simply private. It was the kind of absence you would expect from someone who had spent decades making sure there would never be anything to find. Ironically, the very thing that exposed him was also the thing that couldn't identify him. His fingerprints. The FBI searched every database they could access. National databases, international databases, criminal records, military records, immigration records, nothing. No matches, no aliases, no previous arrests, no forgotten identity, nothing. Whoever this man really was, he had never been fingerprinted under his real name by any system available to the United States or its closest allies. For years, everyone assumed this story was about a man hiding from his past, a fugitive, a draft dodger, a criminal, someone running from something. But investigators eventually realized they had been asking the wrong question. Modern forensic genealogy changed everything. The same technology that has identified victims and solved decades-old murders found nothing. No missing person, no fugitive, no criminal, nothing. Which means the mystery may never have been what he was running from. It may have been who he was. One possibility is that he was avoiding the Vietnam draft.
She said she
The
felt
timeline fits.
disappointed.
A young man
She
looking for a
hopes, more
way
than
to
anything,
disappear.
to see the
But
case
investigators
resolved while
never
she is
found
still
proof.
alive.
Another theory is far darker. What if he wasn't escaping military service, but murder? Somewhere, there may still be a family waiting for answers. A mother who never knew what happened to her son. A brother who stopped looking because there was nothing left to search. For more than 30 years, the world knew this man by someone else's name. And even now, after everything we know, after every fingerprint, every DNA test, every FBI investigation, we still don't know who he really was. The file tells us exactly who he wasn't, but it still cannot tell us who he was. Every document, every fingerprint, every DNA sample points to a man who never officially existed, and after more than 20 years, the only thing investigators know for certain is that they still don't know his name.